Yeah,
So you mentioned coaching and mentoring. Now, coaching is kind of a tete-a-tete where you're kind of at the same level going back and forth. Am I right with this?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
mentoring is
In general, that's so. I haven't found it to be perfectly defined or distinguished in literature, but here's my understanding of it. Coaching is more of a peer-to-peer kind of activity where a manager or even a fellow employee, a peer employee, would coach another in a skill that they have. So the skilled person coaches the unskilled person or the less skilled person to success. And coaching is an art as well. Manager Tools has a lot of guidance on being a better coach. But coaching is more of a let me give you some tasks that you can work, and let's establish touch points to know how well you've done or how the progress you're making. So coaching is much more of a guided activity towards something. Mm-hmm. Mentoring I find to be a relationship between a much more senior and a more junior person, right? And so that can be years sometimes, oftentimes actually, but it can also just be in terms of the profession, right? So a senior level security professional might be younger than an entry level security professional, but have more senior experience, right, in terms of the profession. And so that is a great aspect of mentoring in terms of, and typically I realize that plenty of companies have mentoring programs inside of their organizations that require some sort of relationship between mentor and mentee. That's generally not what I'm talking about. It's more akin to someone accomplished in your profession in the role that you seek. Right, so in looking for a mentor, some qualities you're looking for are someone who is more accomplished in the field, but accomplished not just in the field, accomplished in the role that you desire in the future. Right, so if on your career plan 10 years from now or 15 years from now you want to be a CISO of a Fortune 500 organization, well, guess what? There are 500 CISOs of Fortune 500 organizations now. and there are plenty more who were Fortune 500 CISOs, or Fortune 500 CISOs multiple times over. Those are the people who would be great mentors for you if they're willing. Clearly, my experience has been if you ask well, if you ask in the right way, which means I'm willing to do some work, Mr. or Mrs. Mentor. Here's the work I've already done. I want to do some more work. Can you help me in this? I have not heard of anyone who prepares well in that way to ask a potential mentor. I've not heard of anyone who's been turned down.
You're talking about in the same organization or just outside of work?
So for that in particular, I would recommend outside of your organization. So I would recommend pursuing a mentor who's at a different organization. Mm-hmm. You might have a very comfortable relationship with a more senior person in your organization. Oftentimes, though, because of the nature of the hierarchical relationship, it becomes difficult to establish that really personal connection.
Sure.
That doesn't, put either person's paycheck at risk. Because you as the junior person approaching a senior mentor in your organization, you might be putting your paycheck at risk because you need to be open. You need to be willing to work with your mentor. On the other hand, the mentor might being so open might also put their paycheck at risk. So those situations are difficult. But if you can identify a situation in your organization, that works, especially in a large organization. It's possible in an enterprise.
What kind of work are you talking about? Like you said you're willing to do
great.
work.
Great,
okay,
great.
What kind of work?
Sure.
That's why I asked the other question.
Fantastic. So that's a great question. So let's prepare to engage a mentor. And again, this is a great leadership topic because being a better leader typically engages. So I have 3 people I'm working with right now who I consider mentors, who are accomplished in the field, who've been where I want to be going forward. And so when I engage with those folks, when I initially engage with them, or when I engage with them as a mentor going forward, I come in with a homework assignment. So that homework could be read this material. That homework could be prepare. The very first time I met with the mentor, he was on a panel at an ISSA event in San Antonio. One of his pieces of advice for everyone in the audience was have a written career plan. All right, perfect example of a homework assignment from a mentor. All right, so before I went in to our first meeting, which was a lunch meeting, and pro tip, buy lunch for your mentor, especially if it's the first one. Okay, but yeah, the first time we went in to lunch, I had my written career plan. Okay, so rather than say, hey, I'll you change names to protect the innocent. Hey, Bob, before we go in and say, tell me more about this career plan you mentioned 3 weeks ago at the panel. Rather than that kind of activity, which I would recommend is a poor approach to being mentored. Mm-hmm. Strong approach to being mentored is, here's the career plan that you talked about. Here's my example. I have 3 questions about this that I would love for you to help me out with. Prepared questions is another example of a homework assignment for mentors. Walking into a meeting with a mentor and saying, "Hey, share all your advice with me," is a poor way to prepare. Yeah. Whereas I'm very interested in what it's like to be a CISO in a large healthcare organization.
You want to keep it focused.
Very highly focused, right? Highly focused. 2 or 3 questions that can guide that conversation and be very clear with the mentor about what you're looking for in terms of advice or guidance. Let me see if I can come up with another example of homework assignments I've gotten. So I've worked with mentors as I've been in my kinds of roles, and I've been encouraged to do better one-on-ones with my direct reports, and so I've worked with a mentor in figuring out how those one-on-ones should look. I've worked with a mentor in figuring out what I should be focusing on in terms of my role and guidance as a security professional. And so one of the things was, Phil, you should have a tickler in front of you on a regular basis that covers aspects of security. So you might, for example, put up a poster of the SANS Top 20, right, which is a good kind of like coverage of security controls, and it's simple and easy to look at. And his guidance to me was, Phil, you should be looking at that list on a regular basis and make sure that maybe every other day you're considering something in your organization in each of those areas, so that you don't get pigeonholed too much into always working on inventory or always working on endpoint protection status or something like that. So that was a good example. Some good examples of some homework assignments I've gotten from mentors.
Okay. So we did the mentoring part. Now with coaching, that seems like that'd be a little more complicated, because either the person who wants to be coached is self-aware enough that he notices a deficiency in himself, or the person that wants to coach that person notices the deficiency and goes to that person. Does it work in both directions, or is it a better relationship when the person who's self-aware and realizes, hey, my communication skills could be improved, I need to go to somebody who does that?
Yeah, so I think there are 2 situations there. So I think all 3 of us have been in situations where we've wanted to be better at something, and we've identified someone that we know who's good at it, and we've engaged them, right? You guys have perfect examples. You've engaged people you've been interviewing in, how do I learn this better, right? And so that is certainly a setup for a coaching relationship. If with Kevin's example, for instance, if you re-engage Kevin on some of the topics you engaged in an interview and you followed back up with it, that's certainly a potential for a coaching relationship. Mm-hmm. But a different situation is a situation where a leader has a more vested interest. So a manager or leader, but a manager will coach their direct reports to success in a particular kind of activity. Because a manager has a vision for what needs to be accomplished, has a general idea of how to get there, and maybe has a more junior employee that needs some guidance on how to do it. And so a proper coaching relationship there is not micromanagement. It's not like looking over their shoulder and saying, oh, no, you should have clicked there instead of, should have clicked on the left side instead of the right side. It is a clear relationship of, Brian, I'm expecting for you to accomplish A, B, and C this week. I want to see A tomorrow afternoon. I want to see B by Thursday morning. And I want to see C by Friday afternoon. And here's the measurable steps that we're going to do to get there. And maybe as a coach, you feel like that's enough detail and you have success by the end of the week. Or you felt like that was enough detail and it clearly wasn't, because on Friday afternoon, C was not complete. So you may need to get slightly more granular. And so that's a good example of a coaching relationship with a direct report as a manager, of determining clear, measurable steps. So we talk about these SMART goals, right? These specific, measurable, actionable, repeatable, and time-based, right? So for goals, but oftentimes people establish a SMART goal for an annual thing or for a quarter thing, right? Well, we're talking about measurable goals for the day, or measurable goals for every couple days or the week. that's more of a coaching relationship, right?
In the micro, not the macro.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not, and folks might call that out as an example of micromanagement. And so that would be interesting. We could have a discussion about that. You might be right. But again, I'm going off the guidance that I'm getting from manager tools. And they have extensive discussions about what a coaching relationship looks like. And a coaching relationship is very much I expect this by this time. You can do it however you want, but here's what I expect, and here's what it should look like, and here's when you need it to be done. Go.
Yeah, that talks more about what you talked about. Part of being a manager is trusting the people underneath you to do what is necessary, because a micromanager obviously may not necessarily have the level of trust required, and that may be something that your junior person could go to you and go, I noticed that you're kind of deficient on the trust, that I feel micromanaged, and maybe that's the one-on-one where you would find out from network, management tools or whatever, and that could be something that maybe a junior person could coach by proxy and say, hey, maybe you should reach out to this person who does a really good job, perhaps. And
right.
You laugh like that's something that's happened, or you have a scenario?
Well, no, just that we do talk about, or folks tend to talk about this concept of managing up or managing your manager, and so I find those situations to be funny or interesting, because I think a poor manager, a poor leader, is not aware of what's going on with their team, right? And so, but trust is a big part of it, Brian. You hit the nail on the head. If trust is not involved in our relationships, we are not an effective leader.
Sure.
Right. So we have to build trust on our teams. We have to trust our teams to accomplish something. And trust is all about service. Trust is all about understanding that we're about other people here, and it's not just about me. So I think that establishing and building those trusting relationships is key to being a successful professional. I mean, just professional in general, whether you're a leader or not, trust is required to get anything done for real in the world.
Anything you want to get across that we didn't cover yet? I mean, we asked all the questions.
Yeah. No, this is great. This has been very fun. I was telling you guys earlier that I'm kind of preparing to give some additional talks on leadership, and I'm looking forward to incorporating some of the conversation we've been having in my thought about leadership and how to communicate. Because while I consider myself a student of leadership, and interested very much in following other folks who talk about leadership and who teach on leadership and who are good leaders, there's always something to learn. There's always something to learn from peers, from folks who've experienced good leadership or who've experienced poor leadership. There's always something, others, new ways to look at our own situations in which we've either been poor leaders or strong leaders. So I find conversations like this to be very stimulating, to give me ideas about what else I could incorporate, or how else I can think about it, or what else I know I need to research in terms of understanding leadership even better. So, no, I have nothing else to really get across.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, it's been great, and thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Again, it's my honor and pleasure. Thank you guys so much for engaging me and talking about this. I think it's very important. I think that kind of a final parting thought, I think if we're not about changing the world, if we're not about inspiring other people to dream and to take action, to do something, then really what are we about? So, I mean, that is what security is about.
All right. Well, thank you, Phil, and we hope to maybe get with you again in the future about maybe some more security-related topics, in addition to some even more some leadership ideas.
Sounds good.
And that was the end of our interview with Phil Beyer, Information Security Director at the Advisory Board Company, and all-around really good guy. I really appreciated him coming out and giving us a great interview on leadership.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I was inspired by his talk and the interview, and if I don't know if anyone else was, but if his goal was to inspire at least one person, I think he met that goal.
Well, he did it. He did it times two, I think, because I find myself referring back to some of the things he talked about during his talk and our interview as to ways of maybe doing things differently.
Yeah. You have an example, or?
I'm glad you asked, Brian.
Oh.
Well, this week. Maybe it's an example of what not to do. Maybe leadership through a bit of duplicity. I have a project where it's going to require a major change to the workflow of the people at our organization, and not just I'm eating the dog food too. I mean, we got people having to do things differently through VMs. So we've been planning this for a couple of months, and we're finally getting down to the deadline, and we've got like a couple of people who have been holding out and not really, well, like Phil said, they weren't motivated to do what was necessary to make this happen. So I may have kind of told them that the process was going to go through anyway on Monday, when in fact we're pushing it back a week.
Okay, so that's a bad thing, right?
Well, I think leaders shouldn't have to necessarily lie or stretch the truth to get something done.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife hates it when I lie to her about not doing the dishes. I mean, sometimes it comes easy to me, and I find that these people were motivated once the deadline happened. And I didn't want to ruin that motivation by saying, oh, well, we're going to wait a week.
Oh, I get it. So like, it's a bunch of procrastinators, right? And they're
Yes.
not going to do anything until it's not just a light at the end of the tunnel. It is the end of the tunnel.
Actually, it's the train about to hit them, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I didn't want to ruin their motivation because they were working on the process. They were like, oh my God, I got to get this done, but I got this thing going on Monday morning. So I was like, well, we'll make it happen, and we'll put you in plan B if, you have a problem, which it's going to be a lie because they're not going to process our change ticket until the 15th anyway. But I felt that I didn't want him to go, oh, well, I've got another whole week. I'm not worried about it.
Sure.
I'll just deal with it next Friday. So, I mean, in the end, I'm finding myself probably not. I probably could have done that better. I probably could have escalated it up the chain. I could have asked you if you had a spare cycle or two where you could have walked by and maybe did a little hand holding. Maybe I could have communicated better in the previous weeks and maybe escalated it then so that it wasn't such a big deal now. I think part of leadership is understanding where you went wrong and having a regular lessons learned with yourself to understand that. And maybe I wasn't a very good, maybe I'm not a very good influence. Maybe I'm not a very strong leader when it comes to, implementing processes, and I need to work on that.
Yeah, well, as long as you recognize these things and then actively try to work on them,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm hoping that next week I can improve myself a little bit.
Yeah. Well, speaking of influence, I seem to remember, Phil say about the gun analogy that the person lining up the gun is a significant influence, even though he didn't make the ultimate decision to fire.
Yes.
And you need, I guess you need influence to lead, right? Because if no one is following you, are you actually leading? I guess not. I mean, that's the definition of leader. So
you could be a leader of one. You could be a leader of yourself, and that's not very effective. So yeah. I mean,
I guess you could set an example or whatever, but I think there's a couple of types of influence you can have at your workplace. One of them being your positional influence, right? So a manager would have influence over his directs or something like that. That's one type of influence.
Exactly.
Another type is your technical abilities. So if you're really strong technical person at at your work, and you may have some influence in the organization over people who are less technical than you are. That's another type of influence. So,
well, that's the SME thing. You are the subject matter expert for firewall ACLs or compliance audits. So you would that person has a positional influence on what you would do. You would defer to him.
A technical influence, right?
Leader. He would be a technical leader. Yes.
And I think a third type of influence is the relationship influence. So if you let me think of a scenario here. Let's see, if you need something done that you can't do yourself, you have to ask someone on another team, let's say, to do it, and as a favor or to help you out at your job. Are they more likely? I'm sure they're more likely to say, okay, I'll help you out if you have a good working relationship with that person. I mean, if they think you're an ass, they're probably not they're just gonna give you the finger and make you, find some other way to accomplish your goal, right? So I think a relationship type of influence is something that you gotta have in your back pocket, or at least you want.
Well, would you seek out that person in the first place if you didn't like them, or would you try to find somebody else in that group that hated you less or you were friends with? I mean, we have this at work. I think everybody does. I had it big time when I was in the Navy. One of the things you learned in the Navy was networking. Who is good at something, who you could trust to get it done. Maybe the guy was even maybe an underperformer, but he would do you a favor because he was your friend.
Sure. If not a personal friend, but maybe a colleague that respected you or something like that. But
sure.
So with that in mind, I mean, let's say you wanted to, and the kind of the theme of leadership, at least in the beginning of our talk, was start right now. If you want to be a leader, start now. So with those three types of, and to be a more effective leader, you need to have more influence. So out of the three, I think, let's take positional. In order to start today or start soon with your increasing your influence, I don't think you can get positional influence increased rather quickly. I mean, unless you can get a promotion tomorrow, which, I find that kind of difficult. That really isn't going to work in the short term. Technical influence, I guess you could read, a 1,500-page book on introduction to algorithms to, increase your technical abilities, but it may take a while, at least to get good. And, to be a really good technical person, it's going to take more than one book. It's going to take a lot of learning, right? It may take years. So I don't think you can get significant technical influence increased in a short time. But you can work on your relationship influence. And, it starts with building good working relationships with your colleagues. And that type of influence can work to your advantage, from then on.
Well, I think you go back to technical influence or
positional
influence. I think you could get that kind of positional influence. I mean, take one of the engineers that I'm working with right now with this new process. He came in. He's relatively new. I'd say he's been here about a year and a half. But he's pretty much the go-to guy. There are other people on his team that have been here several years, and yet he's the guy who has a work ethic. He comes in, he wants to help, he's open to suggestions, he embraces change, because you have to embrace change in the workplace. And he's quickly the go-to guy. I mean, every time, we're in a meeting, hey, we need this engineer, we need an engineer who can help us out over in that division. Well, is Frowny available? So, I mean, he is the go-to guy. Oh, and because he was enthusiastic, he embraces change. I don't know if it's willingly, but he does it with a demeanor that makes you think it's willing. Maybe that's the military that, keeps him, agile and he's able to bounce around like that.
Okay.
But I think you can get influenced by your attitude. I think attitude builds influence. I think enthusiasm can build influence and build positional influence. I think he would be the top 1 or 2 people at our office with regard to people I would go to. Now, like you said, his technical skill, as long as he keeps, involving himself with various projects, you can build that technical skill over time and again be another go-to or another subject matter expert on various things. I think you just have to have enthusiasm and a willingness to embrace change and a willingness to want to help embrace that change.
Right. And knowledge is certainly an influence too, especially if you have, like you said, subject matter expert knowledge of the system you're working on. Let's say you're the most senior guy, you've been working on it the longest. That's one type of influence, but it took a long time to build that. Relationship influence can increase in a day, buy someone lunch, order pizza for the group, whatever. If there's some sort of an outage and everybody's working, past the 5 o'clock, go home time on a Friday, order pizza or something. I mean, that's, that relationship influence can build rather quickly compared to the others.
Yeah, I find even bringing in donuts and coffee on a Friday or something, it goes a long way to, making yourself out, instead of a goat to be a not a bad guy.
Right. Especially if there's a lot of donut cravings going on in the office.
It's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a really great interview. I intend on going back to re-listen to Mr. Beyer's interview and his talk at B-Sides Austin, which we have posted and I've tweeted several times to our Twitter feed. But
yeah, I think he's giving this speech or a revised version of it in other places. I'll ask him where they are and maybe if he can record it for us.
Well, I think he mentioned B-Sides San Antonio, and there was a convention in Houston, and maybe that's was that LasCon? I can't remember, but he's doing it, I think, at LasCon. He's also doing it in Houston.
Okay.
I guess that's it for this week. Look us up on iTunes. We're both on Twitter, at Brian Brake, at BetcherPwned. We're on LinkedIn. If you want to link into us, we're in several groups where, we like to talk. And if you want to email us, you might want to send us a Twitter DM first, and then we'll send you the email. But so I guess that's it for episode 11, part 2 of Breaking Down Security. And I hope y'all have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye.